I'm very grateful to be here, also a little bit nervous, but that's normal. And I would like to thank you a lot, the organizer, for this opportunity. So the topic of my speech today, I put the title, Just Green Transition and the Political Value, Perspective from the Agrarian Context. Very briefly, since I will not delve into it, the idea of just transition, which is one of the main topics of this summer school, represents a kind of evolving concept. It seems to me that it outlines at the same time a research and a research program and a political program, which demands to think about justice and class politics, considering both the environmental and social and labor impacts of a transition perspective. 1 second, I just want to put times on. Okay. So my lecture today is aimed at contributing to this debate somehow by formulating some reflection on what are the major challenges a just transition perspective face. And I try to do this discussing the evolution of the promises of green growth applied to agriculture and their impact on labor and the environment. I am particularly interested in how those impacts are related to the ecological and labor contradiction under capitalism. So how they enable, so my idea is to try how they enable to think these two contradictions together in their strictly related and interconnected connection. So, very briefly, main goals, the aim of this presentation is to share with you a few insights from my research work on the political ecology and the economy of green capitalism, hoping to stimulate a mutual exchange and debate also. And I take agriculture, so I'm not a rural sociologist, I'm not a specific person who do agricultural research as a specific topic. My topic is mainly capital and political ecology, so relationship between capitalism and nature and how this has been evolving. But I take agriculture as a starting point for my reflection and as a specific area of research, since I consider that agrarian development is a strategic terrain from which to observe the evolution of the green capitalism paradigm and its main socio-ecological implication. And also, agrarian development is also a terrain that enables discussing accumulation from the point of view of socio-ecological reproduction. And when I say socio-ecological reproduction, I mean both ecological reproduction and the reproduction of labor, which is the other part of ecological reproduction, of social reproduction, so to think them connected. So in this sense, agriculture is a specific way in which capitalism organizes the human metabolism with nature, so the provision of life necessities, but also the organization of labor, which under capitalism is the principal mediator of metabolism, no? And labor is called to mediate capitalism, to mediate metabolism in a capitalist way. So basically, the idea I will try to discuss is that green capitalism configure a speculative policy that on the basis of specific politics of future expand extractivist logics in the present. This implies that the coloniality of power, the devaluation of labor, and the accumulation and impoverishment of social ecological reproduction are central features of the way capitalism deals with the climate crisis, and their analysis must be put at the center of a just transition perspective. And I try to delineate what this implies. So the presentation structure is here. I'll try to develop my arguments in 4 main steps. I will introduce green capitalism and also try to discuss why this imply a specific future-oriented policies. I will discuss the entanglement between green capitalism and the agrarian sector, focusing especially on the moment following the crisis of 2007-2008. And I will delve into two main fields of study I'm conducting: land grabbing, but especially digital agriculture, to stress the relationship between green growth promises and extractivist logic. And in the conclusion, I summarize the principal evidences emerged and their implication for a just transition. Okay, so probably you are all well aware, so sorry if I repeat things you already know, but I try to propose a definition of green capitalism, which is also a definition you can find in literature, somehow is not proper to me. So what is important is that green capitalism can be empirically, so it's an empirical definition, not an analytical one, is a model of climate governance based on a dual assumption that economic growth is compatible with environmental mitigation, but above all that environmental mitigation and ecological preservation, so far and so on, can be a vector for the expansion of capitalism and the market system. This is important because this is something very different from the idea of sustainable capitalism or sustainable growth, which was the paradigm that we encountered before the one of green capitalism. Because sustainable capitalism was the idea that you can insert, let's say, certain tricks into production system to reduce the impact of the environment and to produce sustainable growth. Here, instead, the idea is that preservation and climate mitigation are a specific boost of a specific driver of growth. And this change somehow the gamble that the capitalism is making on its relationship with the environment. So this approach include and expand the idea of the green economy, which is the idea that the best way to protect the nature is to put a value on it and thus a market. Green economy was a major gamble also of I would say, of neoliberal capitalism, because having had to recognize that the free market system or the self-regulated market, as Polanyi would say, with its prospect of endless growth, total commodification, and industrialization of production, is the main at the main root of ecological destruction. Green capitalism say that the answer is not less market, but more market. Central to this idea is the idea of natural capital. So, as we said, the idea of placing a price or an economic value on nature in order to raise interest in protecting this. And it's not surprising that the concept of natural capital has found a resounding welcome in neoliberal circles. So here, classical Malthusian liberal principles, the idea that the market and private property are the most efficient ways to manage natural resources get now combined with a neoliberal approach that intended to stress that intended to treat everything from emotion, knowledge, to sales as potential commodity for a market. No, neoliberal capitalism has seen the commodification of life all the way down. In this sense, other than the green economy, participating in the idea of green capitalism are also this kind of new production paradigm, such as those of the bioeconomy, or more recently, as I will argue, data economy, which manifest an interest in the generative and productive capacity of nature, from cells to ecosystem, and the attempt to incorporate them, or the information they might provide, into production systems to render this latter more performant, also with respect to the climate issues. An example in this sense are the search of biotechnologies, which are biotechnology that can make crops more drought resistant, or they can, I would say, manage the relationship between species and the environment, but also the idea of digital agriculture, which I will develop later. So the idea. Finally, the idea of green capitalism parallel with ecological modernization approaches. So the idea that political institutions and processes have to be further modernized in order to change the direction of the economy towards environmental improvement. And for this, the idea is that the combination action of state and market is proper not to the development and adoption of new technologies and new market dynamics. So an example, without changing the whole framework. An example for this is, for example, the shift to agrofuels or electric car. So the idea to innovate without changing the system. So green capitalism is somehow rooted in all these perspectives, which have a specific political origin, let's say, because they this kind of perspective have been developed since the 70s in response to be very briefly to two main events. To one side, the rise in environmental protests and environmental concerns worldwide, but also to the huge resonance that the Limit to Grow report had also in industrial and neoliberal circles. So with respect to this, development of life science and technoscience has raised the expectation of what Melinda Cooper called the attempt to think a new capitalist ecological regime in order to overcome the geophysical limits of the Earth, thanks to the human ability to manipulate and exploit nature. Last 2 points, and I finish this slide. The other two peculiar elements of green capitalism, which made it something which is really close to the connected to the neoliberal approach, is the total absence of the labor point of view. So this is a strategy which says that market is the solution, and since market is the solution, we do not have to discuss this with people who work. We do not have to involve social partners like trade unions and labor organizations. This is something which, just to make a digression, is kind of changing now, and the rising importance of the notion of just transition also in climate governance debates and so on is attesting this. But this is also interesting because we have to ask ourselves if the inclusion of a just transition perspective, so the idea that labor have to be taken into account, is the result of the failure of this strategy or of labor struggles. This is a kind of point of question. But the point is that this perspective is strictly influencing public policies, because when you decide that labor are not the center and the shift in paradigm is not important, the only way you pursue transition is, and focusing on market, is providing public incentives to private business actors, who are the ones who are entitled to make the transition through the law of concurrences. This is very important, because when they talk about public transition and they give incentives to public enterprises, they are also saying that you do not need to promote the social condition for a change of paradigms. You are just saying that private actors, private enterprises, thanks to the law of concurrences and with public aid, so public debt, so our wages, basically, had to promote this transition. So I make a jump here, hope that is easier to follow, because what I have been interested in my research at the beginning, I won't delve into it later, but is that green capitalism has raised a lot of discussion in the literature, specifically because it evidences the emergence of a new logic of value related to this new role of nature has been seen like productive. And there have been different ways to understand this role, this relationship between capitalism and nature. I just list two, but the debate is vast. The one is the idea that we assist a shift from profit to rent. So the idea that capitalism is increasingly being, how to say, a parasite, a kind of parasite, no, on capturing rent, capturing value, without doing nothing other than capturing it. The other idea, which is informed by ecofeminist and Marxist materialist feminism, is the idea that what is being recognized is the kind of hybrid labor. This definition by Battistoni. Hybrid labor is the idea that what is accumulated is a kind of collective of humans and non-humans acting to regenerate and renew the common world. And this common world is, again, captured by capitalism. So the idea is that the value capture has shift outside the production states to being interested in the common world we collectively reproduce without being paid by no one, but just because we need to exist. These are important insights, and I think they are both useful, the idea of rent, the idea of this hybrid labor and the capture of social reproduction. But I also have been very interested in resonating on the perspective of Melinda Cooper. She's not dealing with green capitalism, but with biocapitalism, but she says something which is, for me, very interesting, because she's recognized that financial neoliberal capitalism has kind of shifted the politics of value, the logic of valorization, toward a new relationship between risk, speculation and debt. So the idea that she say, but really applied to the financial logic, let's say, then I explain you how I take this intuition to discuss green capitalism, is the idea that the politics of value in the context of a neoliberal financialized economics perform through a speculative logic. So it recognizes the productive character of a speculation, insists on the self-organizing mechanism of the market, and based on this, the idea is that what animates the market and defines it is the production of unpredictable events and the risk. So the idea is that under financial capitalism, the production of social risk, the production of economic risk, the destabilization of the system is not just a side effect, but is completely embedded in the logic of valorization, because the market logic say there is no problem. If we have a risk, a new contingency, so we invent new market strategies to fix them, and this is the way capitalism continue. I don't know if it's clear, because I think it takes time to delve in this idea, but no, the idea is that neoliberal governance inhabits this tension between the orthodox conception of value, which is that at the end of the accumulation you need also to provide social security, for example. Now the break with social security, environmental security, is the idea that there is no problem in breaking it, because it's exactly in this destabilization that capitalism can grow. So for me, this is a logic which explains somehow also the logic which is behind the green capitalism. And this quote by Belinda Cooper for me is very interesting. No, say there is because it explains the speculative character, no, the logic of the risk in the name of a future security that is always announced but never realized. And here, I don't know if I am able to say how, but there is a specific political terrain to cope, because this is what I name somehow the politics of value. So applying this to green capitalism, it's maybe somehow a jump, an analytical jump, but also there is a resonances, no? Because green capitalism is, sorry, I just shift to the next slide and I come back, is a specific, form of entanglement of future in the present. No? The idea that society are more intensely future-oriented than those of the past have something which already Gideon said, no, like many years ago, but as Rosa and Jolie said, our travel toward the future is accelerating, and the future colonized the present in many ways. I will say also later that this kind of colonization is strictly literary, but because it's strictly related to colonial way of thinking. But let's say that green capitalism is a specific form of future in the present. I quote here there is a debate on this, I don't report everything, but no, for example, I don't know if I pronounce it well, and others say that climate politics is an incantatory system of governance whose key feature is the speculative alignment of state and non-state actors' expectation of a profitable low-carbon future. Paproxy defined climate change governance as a discursive and material process of social and ecological destruction in anticipation of real or perceived threats. So the differences between the first quote and the second quote is precisely that it is not just the idea of speculating on the future, but what happened in the present. Speculative futures can be problematically concrete. In agricultural and rural context, this is very evident. Here, narratives about the climate crisis shape contemporary responses in a way that entrench and reconfigure multiple inequalities. And as Boras and Jennifer Franco said, for example, in a Hungarian context, the politics of climate change can or may displace or dispossess more people from their land than actual climate change does. Dispossession is an old friend of capitalism, but what is new is in which sense this is part of an reontologization of value, a new way of understand the relationship between risk, limits, and so on. So I try to understand this through I will say that my focus on agriculture, and this because I consider the agriculture sector strongly concerned by the perspective of green capitalism. Primarily because it plays a central role in the context of the global ecological crisis, so marked by climate change and the reach of planetary limits and so on, but also because, as we have said, the expanding commodification of land and biological process is a central element for green growth, since it provides both a kind of new green means of production, things about agrofuels, or is a market strategy for including new assets in new market, things about ecosystem services, for example, or credit carbons, or also the role of flex crops, this redefinition of the... So a moment of accelerating of these dynamics and a turning point with respect to this seems to me can be placed in the aftermath of the neoliberal crisis of 2007-2009, which was the moment in which the global finance system collapsed, but it was also the moment where a huge food crisis happened, strictly linked to financial dynamics, but it also, I cannot explain this because I have no time, it arrived in a moment in when global governance organizations were discussing the failure of past politics, food security politics. So the food crisis has renewed interest in food security in academic, government, and civil society levels. Also, we attest new institution, a new body like the Global Economic Forum, who have no real interest or policy position in food security, starting to deal with this issue of food security. The two main ideas that arose was that expanding arable lands and the sustainable intensification of agriculture, of food production, are key to address systemic destabilization, including those related to the ecological risk. So the idea was that agriculture needs to be combined with climate mitigation. And this has been presented as a kind of triple win strategy. I see now I pronounce some catchword you have secretly understand. The triple win strategy, so for the market, for the society, and for the climate. And we see that this strategy was strictly led by a new protagonism of private actors. So private actors have been called to reach these goals, which is different because agrarian development was also strictly a state issue. Somehow, capitalist with a strong presence of the state. And this is attested also because in developmental discourses, for instance, especially those directed to the African context, agro-industry has been presented as a vector of economic growth per se. This report by the World Bank of 2008 is very indicative. The World Bank haven't published a report on agriculture for 50 years. The last one was agriculture and development, because the role of agriculture has always been seen a kind of push to industrialization. No? It was also a sector, yes, provide growth, but is not the driving of growth. And here we are suggesting that in certain conditions for certain countries, agriculture, agribusiness is the new vector of growth. So all these elements together, the new interest in, also new private interest in land and water as value reserve, and this expanding commodification of land and biological process, all these elements contribute to reconfigure a kind of moving from the idea of sustainable agriculture to the idea of agriculture as an expansion field for green growth. One of the first massive results of this move was global land grabbing. I think you are all aware of this. I shift just to this slide and then come back just to show you these are the three main reports. There are many in that period arguing for this, for agriculture as a specific strategy. I think the one by the European Union is particularly telling because I don't know if you remember that the report on African development, they were also depicted with figure of poor child starving, and now people are not here, land is here. A part of the colonial vision of Africa as a totally rural space, and we know that there are bigger cities are there. But let's go back. When I studied land grabbing just one moment. You all know what land grabbing is. It was a massive shift in land access and control, which happened in the aftermath of 2000, at the beginning of 2000, and especially in the aftermath of the crisis. Land grabbing has always existed, the act of grabbing land, but global land grabbing is specific to this period. One, because it's global, so it's not it's something which is related to a global to a global process. It happens simultaneously in different places, ended especially in Africa. And second, because the huge shift in land access and control had no precedent since the colonial period. So this is something which is very specific in its dimension and drivers. The acquisition involved the transfer of right, use, access, control, or ownership of land through sale, lease, or concession, and this implied the potential or actual conversion of land and its uses shifting from local family and peasant forms of agriculture or from community-based use to agro-industrial exploitation, more export-driven and integrated with the global value chain. So, sorry. I hope not to go into much quickly because I need to go to digital agriculture, which is completely other things, but I'm trying to show the connection. When I studied land grabbing in Senegal, I was particularly interested in how land acquisition engaged with components of social reproduction, including labor and ecological sustainability, and with the historical determined relations of power that structure accumulation in post-colonial context, as well as the specific reaction to them. I cannot explain the whole case study because I have no time to do this, but I try to list some key points which for me are interesting for the kind of discussion I'm trying to bring here. What we attest in this, I studied an investment of 20,000 hectares in the region of the Delta of Senegal, which was a region which has been targeted since colonial times for developing agriculture. The first shift we see in this new openness to foreign investor strategy is that private investments are called to substitute the state in driving the agricultural transformation processes. And this also implies that the local farmer system were no longer considered the center of the development. So the state, thought in a very capitalist way, was really focused in improving the capacity to modernize local farming system in order to insert them in global value agriculture chains. Now, we are not interested in this. We are interested in inserting land in this global value chain. So we see disinterest in exploiting labor, which is very strange from a capitalist point of view. And we can discuss it. I'm very assertive now, I'm sorry. No, this implies both processes of dispossession and expulsions, but it also chronicles a crisis of local labor reproduction in the region because the capitalist change of local relationship between environment, system of production and so on wasn't successful. So poverty was still there, hunger was still there. So when the state and the private actors decide not to continue to help this kind of modernization process that we can criticize, but it's not the point. We have also a kind of worsening of local condition and especially of the labor reproduction condition in the region. And this crisis intersected with major ecological challenges in the region. And this was very clear for the people who were fighting land grabbing there, since they connected their labor struggles, so the struggles over their means of reproduction, with ecological concerns. And this is what also Martinez earlier on environmentalism of the poor says, no? That there are contexts in when the ecological struggles are, the ecological issue is not something that you need to fix once you have solved other material problems like access to health, wage, and so on. But they can be really interconnected. And then we see a centrality of colonial narratives on development, the invisibilization and disqualification of a local solution to promote this. Another element which is very interesting for me is that this investment study, like the huge percentage of the first wave of land grabbing, failed. There was a huge failure. Investors withdrew. They didn't realize what they were promising to do. So there was no capacity to, they were meant to grow up agrofuels, so there was no capacity to improve this ecological transition. There was no this economic growth and social expansion. There was just a chronic chronicization, I don't know how to say, of local crisis and so on. So debate on land grabbing, for this reason, strictly interconnected with the idea of extractivism, which is the other point I would like to bring to discussion together with the one of the speculative move on the future, no? So initially, the idea of extractivism, maybe you also know this, I don't know, was referred to large-scale project of mineral extraction that fashioned development in Latin America at the end of the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s. But then the idea of extractivism has gone expanding to also to large-scale and oriented agriculture. So in line with this reasoning, the notion of extractivism has gone established, for example, in critical agrarian debate to refer to a specific form of agrarian accumulation based on predatory rather than labor-inclusive logic, and on the intensive, extensive exploitation of natural resources with disastrous consequences for the environment. What is important here, that why we need, say, agro-extractivism rather than agribusiness, agro-industry? The idea, which is under discussion, so it's not there is not a total agreement on this, it's something I bring here also to discuss if we want, is this process differs from the more classical agro-industrial exploitation schemes precisely because of the underdevelopment of the productive forces and the resort to monopolistic logic, extractive technologies, economies of scale, and financialization to realize the profit. So we are attesting a kind of devaluation of labor. Agro-extractivism is not that it doesn't need labor, but it needs poor labor and realized value in very distant place, most financial, most export-driven, and so on and so on. I also provide a definition by Alonso Fradejas, who say that it is a form of agricultural development that drives a process of empowering destruction by means of a job-poor, culturally insensitive, toilsome, and unpaid labor-based productive model, and the manufacturing of environmentally and social toxic landscape. So, many things. But trying to take all them together, and then I see, so I use this idea of extractivism to analyze the land grabbing in Senegal, precisely because I think extractivism enables to grasp the specific relationship with this new specific model of natural accumulation and the relationship it entails with labor and ecological reproduction. I'm trying to bring here some definition of extractivism more generally, and trying to focus on this specific relationship, which for me is very important, because it's a way to delineate the specific politic of these future promises. So I'm interested in, as I said before, how it affects present in its very material way, interweaving labor and ecological contradiction of capitalism, so bringing together what it means for socio-ecological reproduction. And in this sense, I think what is important is that extractivism is a model of accumulation that extracts value from land and natural resources, devalorizing in turn labor and local ecologies. So the impact is double. And this kind of extract while impoverishing is very important. I also bring a definition by Ye et al., who say that the destruction of landscape and biodiversity is very central, because what is interesting for me is the idea that it makes their reproduction impossible. So it is a process that could not be recuperated. You cannot move back. When you perform a plantation system, or when you excavate a big mine, open, I don't know how to say in English, but this large-scale mining project, you cannot restore it. You cannot repair. It's very difficult. And also this brings the idea of what I say before, the centrality of social reproduction and the role, the intuition by Marxist and feminist, materialist feminist thought, is that it relies on resource that it doesn't contribute to create or reproduce. So extractivism is something which is also a specific relationship with the world in common, because it finds it as it is, and then with specific operation. I won't say that capitalism is doing nothing in this history, but there is a specific relationship between social reproduction, how it is on it, and how this, how to say, affect the reproduction of social and ecological condition. And there is a discussion if extractivism can be considered an increasing model of global capitalism, which means that the restructuring of different economic sectors is going in line with extractivist logic. So, I don't know if I have put many things in this presentation, but you will tell me. Now, what I'm trying to do, and this is some hypothesis I will present, because thinking about extractivism and so on in large-scale land acquisition is very simple. But my idea is try to see if this kind of centrality of colonial thinking, speculative future relationship, and extractivism logics can also something which perform the proposal of digital agriculture, which is here. I make the credits of the picture at the end of the presentation. They are all by web. When you write digital agriculture, you have these and many other imaging. So, sorry. Okay. So, this is so what's digital agriculture? You already maybe understand about this paradigm. Is a transition paradigm for the agricultural sector, which is based on robotic, mechanical automation, data economy, digitization of inputs to make the sector more cost and climate efficient. Sorry, just need. Okay. So, main pattern of digitalization are robotics, mechanization, remote sensing, modeling, and decision support. You see, the drones, the tractors, and the application on the phone to help to make decision support. This is an evolution of the precision agriculture model, which is emerged in the 80s within the US agronomic debate. And is a fundamental component of the 4.0 transition, which is the idea that a productive system must be more virtualized, interconnected, based on real-time decision, decentralization, modularity, and so on and so on. Within this framework, so the farm of the future is portrayed as a kind of technological utopia in which automated and hyper-connected system, self-driving tractors, drones, sensor-equipped animals, automated greenhouses, and so on, are managed by a new figure of the digital farmer, whose work is made easier, more dignified, and less burdensome by the same technologies. So, this approach got increasing attention in the aftermath of the global energy, food, and financial crisis. I say that it was sustainable intensification and expansion of arable lands. And this very based on this triple wine vision, and this is central in European politics. So digitalization is mentioned in the Common Agricultural Policy, Farm to Fork policy. There is a specific focus on digitalization at the European level. So this is part of the green transition for agriculture. Here there are two reports. So as we see now, the future of farming relies on this innovation capacity and so on. The FAO define digital agriculture as the agriculture 4.0 as the fourth agricultural revolution. So it's a big promise, no? Because first, the other revolution in agriculture were the chemicals revolution, the mechanical, the chemical, and the genomic revolution. Now we have the digital revolution. So there are specific promises on so digitalization is seen as this core innovative solution for a European system that are able to increase productivity, sustainability, and food security. And it's kind of, if the concept updates the concept of sustainable agriculture within the debate on the transformation of the agricultural system. And there is really a promise that is a new place of expanding growth while also fighting climate change. And this is also a perspective which is widely shared by the private sector. No? This is a quote from Cargill, which is the largest agricultural commodity trader worldwide. Currently, I think it's the largest privately owned company in the United States. And you see, again, no, this idea no, that this is specific to private sector to justify in a humanitarian way their interest, but you see the close connection between sustainability, food security, and this new take. What's the problem here? First one, I'm trying to go to the end. So first one, if you, if you see the literature, the specific, not the sociological, but the like more technical literature on agricultural transition, we see that there is, most of the papers are future-oriented. This is specific, no, because techno-scientific promises need to rise hype to be adopted, to make these technologies being adopted. So it is a perfectly regime of promise, and this is attested by literature where most of the paper are scenario-oriented analysis. So they assume, for example, that if you calculate the exact need of fuel and fertilizer, you can reduce them, so optimize the use of water, fertilizer, and fuel. So this is, but there are no scientific evidence to prove the beneficial effects in the social-ecological domain. And it's also very difficult to prove this because agriculture is very diverse. There is a lot of diversity of farm. Okay. So, very briefly, what we see here is that digitalization is being embedded in green capitalism, no? Notions such those of digital agriculture or climate-smart agriculture combine classical productive interest about profit and economic efficiency with promises of climate mitigation and environmental preservation. And they are also embedded in a new frontier of digital accumulation. Again, Cargill say data is the new frontier of our global economy. It's no longer a choice, it's an imperative. So the first hypothesis is that there is a specific intertwining between the paradigm of digitalization and green capitalism, the form and impacts of which are required to be explored. Then my question is, can this be explored according to the idea of extractivism? I made some research in the Italian context. Digitalization is a specific government strategy in the Italian agrarian sector. Here lists some of the specific jurisdiction in it. Just one thing, it's a preliminary, the result I'm presenting here are preliminary result of a 2-year research project. So this is just the first moment. So they are mainly in the form of hypotheses of research than actually data. What we need to know, I try to go quickly to the conclusion, that socio-ecological reproduction in the agrarian context is already very problematic. Italian agrarian landscape is characterized by a prevalence of small and medium-sized, predominantly family-owned farm, but there are two main trends that affect the sector, which are the same trends affect global agriculture globally: the decrease in the number of farms and the increase in the average of farm sites. So what we are attesting, but this is the same in all the region of the world somehow, is that the same mechanism of agribusiness needs an economy of scale to cope with these. Small and medium farmers are being pushed off the market, no? And so in Italy, very small farms are the type of farms that are abandoning the sector or shrinking further in terms of cultivated area. And this process is countered by the increase in large farms, more than 50 hectares, which, although they correspond to a very small part of the total number of agricultural enterprises, have come to manage almost half of the Italian agricultural area in 2012. Effects on labor of these two trends: resort to non-familiar workers, so with a foreign components, and increasing resort to migrant work, which are often overexploited, irregular workforce, largely subjected to illegal hiring practices, human rights violation, and slave-like working condition. Rising importance of subcontractors, this because Italy, you cannot have always huge extensions, so you have person who manage to assemble different parts of land to cultivate them together. This change the relationship between ownership and enterprise, and an increasing impression of agro-industry in territories already severely tested by intensive agro-industrial exploitation. We see, for example, the use of irrigation in areas which have been historically never irrigated. Okay. So, socio-ecological reproduction is particularly evident in the agricultural context. One, because agriculture includes regenerative activities, but the other is really related to the labor. So what I want to stress here very briefly is that the insustainability of agricultural labor is very evident when we look at the condition of the wage labor forces, but also of some little small farm owners. So the idea is that how many researchers have pointed out is that labor forces is increasingly not reproduced by the capital concerned. So the reproduction, so the condition, for example, of migrant labor force is an example of incapacity for the capital to reproduce these labor forces, because those people are not paid enough to reach a dignified life. And they resort increasingly to other kind of cooperative mutual help. So we are already in a kind of extractivist model where the reproduction of the labor forces is not provided by the capitalist enterprises. And we are also in a context where shift one moment to the other slide. Also in a context where the impact of agro-industry have to face with very problematic ecological condition in the Italian context. These are the data from the last report by the Lega Ambiente Climate City Observatory, saying that there are more than 300 extreme climate events recorded in 2023, which means huge expense for state, which means huge expense for public money, which means, or wages. In this, only the Emilia-Romagna and Tuscany two floods of last year costed 11 billion to the state, and there are 31 victims in total in 23. So, concerning labor, what's the promises of digital agriculture. It's very interesting when you look at these images, because we see again that there is no trace of agricultural workers, seasonal workers, migrant bodies who harvest the food. No? This is the idea that their point of view doesn't count. The promise is to replace them, to replace workforce, to intensify the production. So these are probably something which will never, so first thing, see, whose job are we talking about? This is one of part, so we see the promises, sorry, so the first promise is ecological impact reduction, but no certain evidences on it. Then there is a stake on labor, to automatize labor. The idea of automatized labor is something which is very interesting to me, because I follow the intuition of some other feminist lecturer who say, what does it mean? No, because in the history of also some Marxist thought, the idea of freeing humanity from labor is a way to realize humanity. But this hasn't happened, because there are the most burden and difficult labor have been not freed. They are just being put on the burden of immigrants and women. So this is a specific colonial vision of the future of labor, which doesn't take the point of view of the most exploited and just propose to replace them in order to free the human white man who is shaking the hands of the robots. It's just very imaging lecture, but I think is talking somehow. Also because what we are really attesting, because here we are in the regime of promise, and now we are in the actuality, is that what is happening is more that we have an intensification of labor, because this is exactly what multitasking and super intensive machinery are meant to multiply the task that one person can do with the same wage, let's say. So, what I do, just to go to the end, the research on the just transition, labor, and extractivism on digital agriculture in Italy, I started to make some interview to main expert actors or spokesperson of the epistemic community which is promoting digitalization in Italy. Academic persons, startups, associations, trade unions, and think tank on digitalization. There are just 10 interviews, or they are not so much. We have to do more. But what was interesting is that we have the repetitiveness of data, which seems that there is a kind of agreement on the landscape of this digital paradigm. We addressed two main topics, there's a reconstruction of the diffusion of the digital agriculture approach in Italy, the current state of art, limitation and advantages of this paradigm, applicability and inclusiveness of the digital agriculture, and the future scenario visions of agricultural transformation, in particular related to the two tendencies of crisis that I delineated above, so the expulsion of farmers and the problem of disastrous and high climatic events. So what digital agriculture is doing for this, since it is presented as a solution somehow for a sustainable transition to agriculture. What is very interesting is that the main interview outcomes are very alienated with the literature debate. So people say there are huge obstacles to digitalization in Italy. One is related to the machines, which are not meant for a very fragmented territory. They need a huge extension. They are constructed on the base of the North American model of agriculture, so we need to adapt them. There are economic limits. Those kind of technologies are not advantageous for small farms, and this is the whole history of agro-industry, because we talked about Polanyi before, and Polanyi already said with this centrality of the role of machineries and machines. No, is the machines used that need you to, they ask you to change your mode of production in order to be rentable. And so these kind of machines, they call for an intensive, extensive model of production. And what is also interesting, and that environmental sustainability has been also represented as a kind of side effect of economic sustainability. So the need for implementing digitalization in Italy is that farmers cannot cope with the agribusiness industry at the end and the beginning and the end of the circles, and what they can only do is maximize the exploitation of labor. So this idea of intensify it. Okay, so many obstacles, low rate of adoption, and also I didn't put here, but what's very interesting about the ecological effect is that they have been told, for example, that there are a lot of startups in Italy that sell to farmers support decision system. So on your laptop, on your phone, you have a kind of support decision. You insert data, and then they provide a kind of guide to act. And this support decision system, they have many developed through universities. So again, the role of public money. Then, once put in operation, they became a startup, so private money. But the problem is that there is a centrality of these public policies, a huge amount of money developed on it, but in Italy we do not, but in Italy or later in Europe, I think we do not have a common validation system, which say, okay, what are you promising is actually going to be realized, so what are you selling? We don't know. But what is interesting again is that this, against all these constraints, the future scenarios, so when you ask, okay, so what's about the importance of the digitalization paradigm, all the respondents say that they were very optimistic that digitalization still remains the answer to improve the sustainability and the growth and the economic growth of agriculture. So this is the right way to do. So it is a necessary cost-saving strategy, but they are aware that this is a slow and non-inclusive process. So this is, namely, when I ask them, yeah, it needs for small farmers to exit the landscape, and we need to improve agribusiness enterprises able to use these technologies in an economy, or in an adequate economy of scale. Also, one respondent answered to me when I asked to say, but this strategy of big agribusiness with huge scale, huge control of land, being totally digitalized. Okay, when we will reach this? Like in 50 years, 100 years? When? Because climate world is burning. No, we need a solution now. And say, I'm not sure this will never happen. We will not sure. We are trying to it, but it's complex. So without this insight on the politics of time and the specific relationship between future and present and extractivism, maybe it's complicated to put together this very contradictory affirmation that arise in the Italian context. But it's not because of Italy. I think we can find the same in other contexts. And people who answered to me, they were perfectly aware of this. They are not. I'm not treating them as a stupid person. We just trying to discuss on this contradiction. So this observation support what? The claims that the digital paradigm is designed to serve the intensification of the agri-industrial model and these trends, particularly land concentration. In this context, technological transformation is intended to minimize the impact of highly impactful model of agriculture, and this is influencing the transformation of labor exploitation. However, what is interesting to me is that if these transformative approaches are not tailored to the majority of those working in agriculture, they are not tailored to the territorial context in which they are intending to operate. Once, because, as we have seen, agribusiness is already too much impactful on the Italian context, and also because we need emergentially and urgent responses. We cannot wait for this digital promise to be reached. So the highly speculative character of these promises of green digital transition is neither repairing nor responding, but is accelerating the destruction of the socio-ecological foundation. Again, and in this sense, is promoting a kind of extractivism logic which pretending to accumulate data and information provided by nature is actually features a socio-ecological crisis of reproduction because it's totally abandoning, for example, those farmers who really want and need to, to be helped to change their way of production. There is no help in this sense. I'm going to the conclusion, hoping I've said something interesting. So, to conclude, anticipatory narratives and hype dynamics are central to green capitalism, but they configure a specific political ecology and political economy of value accumulation, the materiality of which can be captured through the concept of extractivism. A process, and retake the definition I gave before, in which destruction of landscape and biodiversity make their reproduction materially impossible. And it is also based on resources that did not contribute to create or reproducing, including labor. So, since the way we see the future is a key component of societal life and is deeply rooted in the ways we know and in our trust in progress, just to conclude, I think that a just transition approach should be really rooted in struggle for climate justice and the colonization of labor and future imaginaries. This means bring the perspective of environmental struggles back into focus, so those struggles will see that labor and ecology are intertwined and a degradation of the former imply a degradation of the latter and vice versa. They stress the importance to ask for reparative and responsive and restorative policies, not future-oriented, but actually tackling with present disaster. In order to escape colonial future, we really need to decolonize our common present, which means rethink our idea and trust on progress and try to observe the role that social reproduction has in this moment for capitalism, but also for our common future. Hoping I will. Thank you.